So here we have these external aspects. Of course, one can see how the Tariqa Muhammadiyya is really picking up on this earlier division between Tariqat al-Zuhd and Tariqat al-Shukr in the Islamic tradition. Tariqat al-Zuhd represented by Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Tariqat al-Shukr represented by the early Shazali tradition. Where you should be, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, his personal example of sort of having to remove himself completely from society, to leave his position, to leave his family in order to get ma'rifah, is an example that, of course, difficult for most people to apply. So this idea that you can actually get the height of knowledge of God, ma'rifah, by being involved in the society and following the sunnah, this is, of course, an old idea. The Tariqa Muhammadiyya picks up on this and puts it into practice as well. Combines it with this practice of loving the Prophet. Now, involved in loving the Prophet, and I can think of the reason to choose this particular topic, Tariqa Muhammadiyya, for a conference called The Sacred Path of Love. I can think of no better embodiment or description of that in the Islamic intellectual history of this particular movement, right? Because it sort of condenses and really emphasizes this Hubb Rasul. So involved in this, of course, is the annihilation in the Prophet. Now, those of you that are familiar with this discourse know that an earlier generation of Orientalists thought that Fanat fi Rasul among the Tariqa Muhammadiyya was thought to be a replacement for Fanat fillah. This is actually incorrect. Fanat fi Rasul can only happen after Fanat fillah. Right? It's the difference between Fanat, or otherwise described as Fanat and Liqa. Right? Your ability to exist in the world after having the experience of annihilation in God requires that you in order to be involved in the world in the correct manner, following the sunnah as you should, you have to be annihilated in the Prophet's eyes. Practically speaking, this path emphasized Salat al-Nabi. All of these new Sufi orders, if you want to call them that came to existence during this time, revolve in their actual awrad around Salat al-Nabi. I will just quote Hassan al-Ujaymi, who was a contemporary, who lives in the 1600s, a contemporary of Ibrahim Qurani, who I'll talk about in a minute. This quote is wrongly attributed to Ahmad ibn Idris sometimes, because he quotes it. But he says, the basis of this path, Tariqa Muhammadiyya, consists of the interior of its follower becoming absorbed in the witnessing, the shahood, witnessing the being or that of Muhammad, while earnestly imitating the Prophet outwardly in word and deed, busying his tongue with invoking blessings upon him, and devoting himself at all times, whether in seclusion or in public, until honoring the Prophet comes to dominate his heart and to permeate his inner being to such an extent that he need only hear the Prophet's name and he starts trembling. His heart is overwhelmed beholding him, and the visible appearances of the Prophet emerge before his inner sight. So that leads us to the last element emphasized and often considered the distinctive attribute of Tariqa Muhammadiyya. But I think you agree it's probably not. But this ru'ya Nabi, the seeing the Prophet. And of course, this is something that is clearly evidenced in the Islamic tradition. We have military, everything from military events. Tariq ibn Zayd, when he goes into Andalusia, he sees the Prophet tell him to go. When Abu Hassan al-Ashri abandons the Mu'tazilite thought and establishes the Ashri school of Kalam, he does so at the urging of the Prophet. Other aspects, when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, his dream of the Prophet played a large role in sort of reconciling Sunni opinion around the dispute in the Battle of Siffin between Ali and Abi Talib, and Muawiyah ibn Sufyan. He sees Ali and Muawiyah in the presence of the Prophet, and the Prophet takes them into the court of Allah. They come out, and Ali's face is full of light, and he says, Allah has decided in my favor, and Muawiyah says, yes, but Allah has forgiven me. So this was, I think, formative in the sort of reconciliation within the Sunni tradition of a dispute that threatened to break apart the community. And this was an example. And we also have minor elements of fiqh that are solved by the appearance of the Prophet in visions. So I think it's fair to say that the visionary appearance of the Prophet to prominent ulama throughout Islamic history has been sort of an unknown but a very important source of guidance. What's different with the Tariqa Muhammadiyya, again, is not a qualitative difference. It's not the fact that this didn't happen before, but it is one of quantity. These are people that are speaking about the complete, or seeing the Prophet the Prophet does not disappear from them. And although this is also an opinion related by Abu Abbas al-Mursi, that the Prophet says, he said, if the Prophet disappeared from me for the blinking of an eye, I would cease to consider myself among the Muslims. I think what's different with the Tariqa Muhammadiyya, just from an external historical perspective, is the effect that this ru'ya has. With the most important figures here, Sheikh Ahmed al-Jani and Sheikh Ahmed ibn Idris, the contact with the Prophet actually inaugurates like a new form of social organization. And with the Tijaniyya, for example, then everything, the weird, everything that the dhikr, everything has been arranged, Tijani's belief, by the Prophet directly. So if you don't mind. Okay, I mentioned that this has an earlier, these are drawing on earlier sources. So certainly these ideas were there before. Of course, Ibn Arabi, Ibn Karim al-Jilli, they were emphasizing this notion. They're not the only ones, of course, but they are formative in articulating the ideology of the Haqiqa Muhammadiyya, which is, of course, essential for this idea that the Prophet ﷺ would be a continued source of guidance for the Muslim community. Interestingly enough, that's coupled with this Ahmad al-Wasiti, who's a disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah. Like his teacher, he sort of officially rejects Haqiqa Muhammadiyya, but in fact, I think it might be said that he retains it. He talks about Nur Muhammadi, and he actually is a Shazali, but abandons his Shazali order for something he calls Tariqa Muhammadiyya. It's one of the earliest articulations of the idea. Of course, the Shazali in North Africa spoke very often about the importance of Fana fi Rasul, and that the wali should be involved in society. This really culminates perhaps with the Jazaliyya. Sheikh al-Jazali is, of course, the author of the famous Dalail al-Khairat, that many of you probably know. In the East, the Naqshbandi Mujaddidi also started to talk about these ideas. Of course, the great Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi was also emphasizing that the wali of God should be on the footsteps of the Prophet. He's also talking about Ru'ya Nabi. He also during his time, he's credited with the articulation of a sort of so-called orthodox Sufism. He's against certain popular practices. Said that he rejects music, though I haven't done extensive studies on Ahmed Sirhindi. And of course, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti was important in sort of, I think, justifying for the Sunni mainstream the idea that the Prophet ﷺ is alive. Right? To consider the Prophet dead, as with other dead men, as we spoke before, is inappropriate of his rank. He's not alive that he would bring new revelation, but he's alive in the barzakh, and people can see him bizatihi, in his essential being. Okay, I hope that this would come out a little clearer. As I said, there's sort of an external aspect and sort of an esoteric aspect to this development. The exoteric has to do with these hadith networks, the ijtihad networks. There were a variety of scholars in the 18th century, beginning from the late 17th century. They were traveling the Muslim world, they were meeting with each other, they studied with each other, they exchanged hadith and ijaza and a variety of different sciences. Sometimes this is called the Qurani school because Ibrahim Qurani, who died in 1689, was such a central figure in Medina Munawwara. He's not the only one. Hassan al-Mujayni is another, Muhammad al-Maghribi. But by and large, all of these people were part of various Sufi orders as well. So here we have at the top Ibrahim Qurani. I know it's difficult for you to read, so I'll just pick off a few here. Way off to the right, we have Abu Tahir al-Qurani, who's his son, who transmits to Shah Wali Allah al-Dehlawi, who visits Medina Munawwara, I think in the 1720s or 1730s. So he's associated with this network, and I think if you've read Marcia Hermanson's treatment of his opinions on Islamic law and ijtihad, you can get a clear sense that he's also talking about ijtihad outside of the madhab while retaining the Hanafi madhab. And in his case, very interestingly, it seems that his intention was actually to abandon the Hanafi madhab until he saw the Prophet ﷺ tell him to stay with the Hanafi madhab. Okay, you're trying to... No, I can't see that. Okay. Oh, did I miss some other points on that? But no problem. What I meant to mention before, after the Shazali Jazaliya, there also is, of course, the Ottoman reform movement sparked by Muhammad al-Burqawi and the Qadazadalites. And so, yeah, this was it pulled from a variety of different sources. Now, getting back to this question of the actual links between these scholars.